looking at Israel 2019, Character of the Christ Tour, Part 2, Jesus' Public Ministry. So again, you might want to have available a map of Israel in Bible times. During the second session, I will be focusing on Jesus' ministry in northern Israel, that part that belonged to the kingdom of Israel. Once the nation split in two after King Solomon's reign, we'll start at the Sea of Galilee and circle it counterclockwise from its eastern shore. Now, as Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. Jesus was going throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness among the people. It's in Matthew. So the Sea of Galilee is roughly 53 kilometers, that's 33 miles in circumference, about 21 kilometers, that's 13 miles long, and 13 kilometers, about 8 miles wide. Its area is 166.7 kilometers, 64 square meters at its fullest, and its maximum depth is approximately 43 meters. So there on the map, you can also see where the Lake of Galilee is. Beside the Sea of Galilee, was I the last one to realize that the Sermon on the Mount was delivered overlooking the Sea of Galilee? As a child, I think that I assumed that Jesus spoke from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, because that was the mount of which I had heard. It's no wonder that Jesus so often retired to the top of the mountain to find peace. The scenery is so serene. Departing from there, Jesus went along by the Sea of Galilee, and having gone up on the mountain, he was sitting there. Matthew 15:29. So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. John 6, verse 15. Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. Mark 4, verse 1. So on Sunday morning, we went out onto the Sea of Galilee in a boat, in which we listened to an exhortation and broke bread with Christadelphian brothers and sisters of like precious faith from around the world, and also with a brother and sister who came with me from Ohio. The old boat pictured was discovered in 1986 during a period of drought. To move it, the boat was covered with polyurethane foam and floated to shore. Carbon dating of substances found in the boat suggests that it was from the period during which Jesus preached.
Gergesa or Gennesaret. The location of Gergesa or Gennesaret is not certain. However, it was most likely along the eastern shore of Galilee, midway down the shore. totally on the other side, eh? Kersey National Park, Sea of Galilee's eastern coast. Tradition suggests that this is the site identified with Gergesa or Gerasa, which is the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee, where Jesus healed Legion, the man possessed by many demons. This view illustrates one of the hills from which the swine might have raced down into the water. Kersey is mentioned in the Talmud as having been a center of idol worship, and our Israeli guide was adamant that Jews who consider pigs to be unclean would not have been raising them for the Roman army, as some speculate. The Golan Heights is a plateau made of the dark-colored basalt rock. The area was captured from Syria and occupied by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War, territory which has been administered as part of Israel since 1981. It's roughly that light blue area in the upper right-hand corner of the map. A drive along the Golan Heights, it's no wonder this territory is coveted as a strategic location. And we did see a few Syrian bunkers in the hillside and signs warning of minefields. Our Israeli guide told a story about Eli Cohen, an Israeli spy from 1961 to 65, who is alleged to have developed close relationships with the Syrian political and military hierarchy and becoming chief advisor to the Syrian Minister of Defense. As the story goes, the Syrians complained that their bunkers were too hot by day and too cold by night because of the basalt rock from which they were constructed. So Cohen advised that planting eucalyptus trees to shade the bunkers would help to keep the temperatures more even. When the Six-Day War broke out on the Golan Heights, how do you suppose the Israelis knew exactly where to bomb the Syrians? Very clever.
Mount Herman's snow-capped ridge is on the Lebanon-Syria border, west of Damascus. It rises to 9,232 feet. That's 2,814 meters, and is the highest point on the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea. In the Old Testament, it represented the northwestern limit of Israelite conquest under Moses and Joshua. Herman Stream Nature Reserve. Mount Herman, considered by some to be the Mount of Transfiguration, absorbs both rain and snow, and the water percolates down through the limestone until it emerges as springs at the foot of the mountain. Those springs create the Dan, Herman, Paneas, and Senior Hasbani streams, which are the headwaters of the Jordan.
Herman Stream. This tributary, one of three flowing from the base of Mount Herman, is also called the Paneas. It's named for the Greek god Pan, and the location was named for that deity or deity. Paneas, however, Arabic speakers have difficulty differentiating between the sounds of a ba and a pa, so the stream has taken on the Arabic name of Paneas.
Sorry, Deb, I just saw your chat. So if everybody could open their chat box, you'd be able to see Deb shares with us on different slides. When she has something to add, she will type it in the chat box. And if you have a question, you can type it in the chat box, or you're welcome to also interrupt us and ask. But you'll have to have your chat box open to be able to see Deb's reply. Okay, so we'll continue. The Sanctuary of Pan. This artist's impression of the original structures at Paneas depicts 4 temples, dedicated from left to right to Augustus, Zeus, the tomb temple of the dancing goats, and to Pan himself. Remember that Pan is always pictured with the head and torso of a man and the thighs and legs of a goat. Occasionally, he also has goat horns. This is the back wall of what had been a temple, with niches housing the statues of Greek deities. You can also see a passageway on the left that would have led to the Grotto of Pan, the holiest part of the temple complex. History of Paneas. At the end of the 1st century BC, the Romans annexed Paneas to the kingdom of Herod the Great. Josephus records that Herod built a temple there, close to the springs, and dedicated it to his patron, Caesar Augustus. After Herod's death, his kingdom was divided among his 3 sons, and this territory was awarded to Philip, who made Paneas the capital of his kingdom in 2 BC. He called it Caesarea Philippi, not to be confused with the Caesarea Maritima on Israel's coast. Paneas continued to be the capital of the kingdom during the days of Agrippa II in the second half of the 1st century AD. Acts 25, verse 13 to 14. Now when several days had elapsed, King Agrippa and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and paid their respects to Festus. While they were spending many days there, Festus laid Paul's case before the king. Note the 2 different sites biblically named Caesarea. Number 1, Caesarea Philippi, southwest of Mount Herman. So you'll just have to look there on the map at the 2 arrows. And then number 2, Caesarea Maritima, an ancient city on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, where the centurion Cornelius built a synagogue for the Jews. The Herman spring, bursting out of the foot of the mountain, was thought by the pagans to be waters from Hades. This grotto, pictured below to the right, was considered to be the gate into Hades. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he was asking his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it." Matthew 16, 13 to 18. This reference to Hades, translated as hell, in some versions adds an additional layer of meaning to the passage for me. Dan Spring, named for the tribe of Dan, which relocated to the north of Israel when it failed to conquer the land allotted to it. The Dan Spring erupts from the base of Mount Herman and eventually flows into the Jordan River, north of the Sea of Galilee. So Dan is a city mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, described as the kingdom of Israel's northernmost city. And belonging to the tribe of Dan, the city is identified with an archaeological excavation site known as Tel Dan. This is the site in Dan where Jeroboam placed one of two golden calves after Solomon's kingdom was divided. All Jewish men were required by the Mosaic law to go down to the temple in Jerusalem 3 times a year: Passover, Pentecost, and Feast of Tabernacles. But the temple was in the kingdom of Judah, and Jeroboam didn't want his subjects to be drawn to Jerusalem. So he made Israel to sin by placing golden calves here at Dan and in Bethel, and by requiring that his subjects worship at one of those two idols instead of in Jerusalem.
The Hula Nature Reserve. Diverted from Hazor due to weather, we walked through parts of the Hula Reserve, which was previously swampland that bred malaria. The project of creating Israel's first nature reserve started in the 1950s, when swamps around Lake Hula were drained. The reserve now hosts 200 migratory birds, as well as water buffalo, swamp turtles, otters, and nutrias, which are large web-footed rodents. The bottom right-hand picture is a papyrus plant. Capernaum was a fishing village established during the time of the Maccabees, located on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It had a population of about 1,500. Archaeological excavations have revealed 2 ancient synagogues built one on top of the other. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been taken into custody, he withdrew into Galilee, and leaving Nazareth, he came and settled in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. Jesus said to the Jews of Nazareth, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself,' and you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard that you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown." During this confrontation, the townspeople took Jesus to the edge of a cliff to throw him off, but Jesus got away. Then he went down to Capernaum.
Capernaum became Jesus' home base during his public ministry once he was rejected at Nazareth. It was also Peter's hometown. Located on the western bank of the Sea of Galilee, the ancient town of Magdala, named Magdala in Arabic, began in the Hellenistic period and grew to a thriving fishing village by the time the Romans invaded in 1667 AD. Here Jesus likely taught the multitudes and healed the afflicted, including a woman who made her hometown famous, Mary Magdalene, aka Mary of Magdala. Speculation alert. The Bible tells us that a woman named Mary was associated with Magdala and was cured of 7 afflictions. In Luke 7 describes a sinful woman who washed Jesus' feet with her tears and anointed them with expensive perfume. Was this also Mary of Magdala, who had followed Jesus into Judea? The incident in Luke 7 occurred in the home of Simon the Pharisee. How did this woman gain access into the house? The Bible tells us of another Mary of Bethany, who also anointed Jesus' feet with expensive perfume and wiped them with her hair. Judas Iscariot characterized her, suggesting that the perfume should have been sold to help the poor. This incident occurred in Mary's home, whose father was Simon the leper. So, how is it that Judas was brazen enough to scold Mary in her own home? Speculation continued. Were Simon the Pharisee and Simon the leper the same person? Possibly because the former became afflicted with leprosy following his negative interaction with Jesus. Connecting all these dots then makes Mary, Martha, Lazarus, and Judas' sibling all children of Simon the leper, formerly a Pharisee. This then explains why Judas, her brother, was bold enough to scold Mary, his sister, in her own home. Note that Mary of Magdala and Mary of Bethany are never in the same place at the same time in the Bible. I can't take credit for this speculation. Brother Harry Whittaker explains it much more eloquently in his studies in the Gospels, if you're interested in exploring this idea further. The Magdala synagogue was discovered in 2009, only 30 centimeters beneath the surface. This is the oldest synagogue excavated in Galilee and one of only 7 first-century synagogues in Israel. Note the rectangular Magdala stone standing in both pictures. A small mosaicked room on the southern side of the synagogue was likely where the Torah scrolls were stored. The Magdala stone is one of the unique finds in the synagogue, believed to be a holder for the Torah and prophet scrolls. It represents the Temple of Jerusalem. The oldest carved 7-branched menorah flanks one side of the stone. The menorah is tripod-based, similar to the menorah image found on a wall in the burnt house in Jerusalem, indicates the likely authenticity of its replication to the menorah in the temple.
More views of the Magdala stone. The rosette design on the top represents the veil before the Holy of Holies. The backside offers an image of a fiery chariot to represent the divine presence in the Holy of Holies. Excavations at Magdala have also unearthed a large marketplace with over 20 rooms, from which would likely have been sold everything from pottery to woven goods and fresh produce. Look at that, look at the new road. Tel Megiddo, our final stop in northern Israel. The archaeological mound itself has an area of 15 acres and rises almost 60 meters, which is 200 feet above its surroundings.
Amazing view.
Now we're going to Megiddo. Megiddo was one of the most important cities in biblical Israel. Its location allowed it to control the international trade route in the valley of Jezreel below. That road was the main thoroughfare between the ancient world's centers of culture and power, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Because of its strategic location, Megiddo became the arena of frequent battles for its control. The Bible notes Megiddo in the list of towns whose Canaanite kings were defeated by Joshua in Joshua 12, verse 21. King Solomon levied taxes to build the house of the Lord and his own house and Millo and the wall of Jerusalem and Hazor and Megiddo and Giza in 1 Kings 9:15. Later, Jehu shot King Ahaziah of Judah, and the latter fled to Megiddo and died there in 2 Kings 9. Here too, when Pharaoh Necho saw King Joshua of Judah, Necho killed him at Megiddo. 2 Kings 23, verse 29. General Edmund Allenby declared himself Lord Allenby of Megiddo after defeating the Ottoman Turks here in World War I. At Tel Megiddo, there's evidence of 30 different ancient communities built layer on top of layer. The site has been conquered and destroyed 25 times and rebuilt each time, except following its final destruction. These restored gates at the left to the mountain fortress of Megiddo may date back to Solomon's reign. It must be awesome. Sure.
It's obviously built strong with like big rocks.
A public grain silo, possibly built by Jeroboam II, is over 7 yards or 7 meters deep and 12 yards or 11 meters in diameter, allowing it to hold 1,000 tons of wheat, some of which was likely used to feed horses stabled within the city. The picture on the right, this is a trough or manger from one of 2 stables found at Megiddo. The presence of expansive stables attests to the city's use as a cavalry stronghold. While Jesus' manger was likely made from wood instead of stone, you can visualize a baby sleeping in one of these. Megiddo's water system.
The system was hewn during the period of the Israelite kings, possibly Ahab, in order to bring water into the city without having to exit the walls during times of siege. The hewn shaft, 40 yards or 36 meters deep, connected to a horizontal tunnel more than 76 yards, 70 meters long, that extended to a spring in a cave at the foot of the mound, outside the walls. The tunnel's incline ensured that the water flowed to the bottom of the shaft, from which inhabitants drew their water. The outer entrance was concealed by a massive wall covered with earth. Overlooking the valley of Jezreel from Tel Megiddo, mentioned often in the Bible, these fertile plains hosted many battles. This was the scene of Gideon's battle against the coalition of 3 different armies. God would allow Gideon only 300 fighters to demonstrate that it was God, not men, who had true control. First, Gideon dismissed all the faint of heart. Then he dismissed those who drank from the water by lapping it like as a dog, as well as those who bowed down on their knees to drink, leaving only 300 who lapped the water by lifting it to their mouths. Excerpts from Judges 7, verse 2 to 6. The Lord said to Gideon, "Now therefore come, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is afraid and trembling, let him return and depart from Mount Gilead." So 22,000 people returned, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many. Bring them down to the water." So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, "You shall separate everyone who laps the water." Now the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to the mouth, was 300 men. I've always gotten confused as to whom Gideon picked and whom he sent home. Our Bible study on this subject clarified it for me. First, the fearful were sent home. Then, those who were not watchful of their surroundings because they bent over to lap up the water. Let us not be fearful, but watchful. This is also the plain where Deborah and Barak defeated the army of Jabin, king of Canaan, and where King Saul was defeated by the Philistines. Revelation 16, verse 14 to 16, identifies Har Megiddon, the Mount of Megiddo, as the site where the kings of the whole world will be gathered together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. A very powerful imagine looking down from Megiddo. And to close, sunset over northern Israel. So Israel 2019, character of the Christ tour.